everyone, Miss Desario here. We are going to start our 1.9 video notes on the expansion of slavery. Your objective for today is that students will be able to explain why slavery increased in the American colonies. So essentially we're going to break down what happened in order for slavery to increase in North America. So we're going to start by talking about cash crops. And cash crops are crops that brought in a lot of money, partially because they use slave labor for them. And they are what led to the increase of slavery or of enslaved peoples in North America. The cash crops in North America were rice, indigo. Again, indigo is a plant that you make or use to make blue dye with, cotton, and tobacco. Something interesting to note here, off to the left we have, this is an actual picture. And I'm sorry, I don't know where my citation is. My apologies for that. But this is a picture of a rice farm. And this rice farm was actually, because it's a picture, was taken a little bit later. But it still shows the fact that it was very labor intensive. And like most of the cash crops, or all of the cash crops, really relied heavily on enslaved labor, but also the knowledge that enslaved people from Africa had about some of these crops. Especially about growing rice, growing and harvesting rice. Growing and harvesting rice is extremely labor intensive and very difficult. And so what slave owners would do is they would find slaves from parts of Africa that were rice growing cultures, and then bring those enslaved Africans to their plantations and have them show everyone else how to grow and harvest the rice. So it wasn't just the labor, but also the knowledge that these individuals brought with them is what made the Southern colonies' economic structure so successful. Another aspect of the expansion of slavery was the expansion of slave codes as an effort to limit any sort of power or control that an enslaved person might have, and really to fully control enslaved people. That was the goal of these slave codes. And off here to the left, we have an example of a slave code from Virginia, and I'm just going to take a moment to read this to you. All servants imported and brought into the country who were not Christians in their native country shall be accounted and be slaves. All Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves within this dominion shall be held to be real estate. So essentially right here saying that all slaves are now property. If any slave resist his master, correcting such a slave, and shall happen to be killed in such a correction. So here they're saying that if a slave resists and you have to correct that slave, and that slave happens to be killed in the correction, the master is going to be free of all punishment, as if such accident never happened. So this is giving permission for a master to kill their slave. and not be found guilty of murder. So again, this really is set up so that the masters have complete control over the enslaved individuals. Slave codes began in Virginia in 1660. So remember, the first slaves were brought to Jamestown in 1619. So there was a period of time where slaves did have more freedom, still very much enslaved, but it wasn't until 1660 when the slave population increased that slave codes became more popular in an effort to have complete and total control over these individuals. The slave code also stated that bondage was going to last a lifetime, so meaning slavery would last a lifetime. And it was passed from a mother to child. So if your mother was a slave and you were born, you were automatically enslaved as well. Some other examples of slave codes would be you could not own property. You could not travel without permission. You usually had to have a special document. In fact, if you go to some of the museums in Old Town Alexandria, they can show you examples of what those look like. You could not testify against a white person in court. So if your master did something to you, you couldn't testify against them in court. And you could not gather in groups. So again, just to summarize here, slavery increased because in the North America because of the increase of cash crops and the need for enslaved labor. And because of the increase of slavery, there was also the increased need to feel like they needed to control the slaves, which they did by implementing slave codes, which started in Virginia and then spread throughout the South, limiting any power or any freedom that slaves may have.